Coming up next on Twitch this week in computer hardware, hot new motherboards, CPUs, and GPUs, and all those Revo SSDs. Ryan Shrout's at Computex Taiwan. We talk about when an SSD isn't worth upgrading to, and wear and tear from hibernating, sleeping, and shutting down. All coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 122, recorded June 2nd, 2011, the Computex Festival.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to create a high-quality website or blog. For a free 14-day trial, go to squarespace.com/twitch and be sure to check out their annual plans for savings of up to 20% off. And by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC, Mac, or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs by mail in about one business day. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by the man, the myth, and oh my goodness, the frequent flyer miles are piling up for Mr. Ryan Shrout of PCPer.com. Computex Taiwan?
Computex in Taipei, Taiwan, an annual tradition for me now. I think this is like my 10th trip over here. So this is where you go to, the motherboard manufacturers and a lot of these technology companies are based in Taiwan. Computex, I don't think it's the largest technology show in the world. I think that's CeBIT over in Germany in the March-ish timeframe. But this is pretty big, and it's very specifically focused on the industry that we cover on this show, which is, PC hardware and technology in that regard. So it's a very good show.
CeBIT's something I want to see because it's kind of like a World's Fair, but it's also, they do things like you'll go into a pavilion and they'll have the gigantic 50-yard long printers they use to, print magazines and newspapers when they have to do like, 400,000 of them a day. So Computex is big. Actually, also some of the cell phone vendors are talking. There's been crazy news going on with Intel ARM processors, Windows 8 writes for tablets. Windows 8, obviously a big deal. And it's been interesting. There's kind of like two versions of Windows 8. There's the traditional Windows 8 UI that's coming out that has basically a Windows 7 feel. And then another version that is tablet specific, which really looks like an expansion upon the Windows Phone 7 interface.
Which is good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no. I really like the Windows Phone 7 interface. I feel bad for everybody who bought one and then didn't get an update for their phone for several months. But it's you had posted one of the articles from CNET, had a bunch of the pictures. CNET's Dan Ackerman wrote it up, had some of the pictures from All Things D, which is where it's been going down this week because Computex isn't enough. All Things D and various other things are going on. Microsoft expert Mary Jo Foley, who I think is probably the best observer of Windows and Microsoft in the business, quote, "For PCs, I am not so sure, especially for legacy PCs like my 2-year-old Asus Thin and Light laptop. Why would I put Windows 8 on this non-touch-centric machine? Yes, I heard Microsoft execs say that the so-called modern shell, or MOSH, will allow users to interact with a keyboard and mouse, and I believe users will be able to switch between the touch-centric mode and a more traditional arrow interface mode with Windows 8. But why should the default interface optimized for gestures and touch be required on a machine that I never plan to put my grubby fingers on?" And it's really interesting because the other thing that came out this week is I want to say Asus's CEO was quoted because apparently Microsoft is trying to force chip vendors who want to be involved with Windows 8 tablets to work with a single computer vendor, which one is I don't even think Microsoft could have pulled that off at the height of their powers, although they did some fairly nefarious stuff back in the day. But they are obviously trying desperately to create the level of control over I did this on Texilla this week. I was like the hardware software, connection.
Right.
They want more control over the channel because if they more tightly control the hardware models and the software and how they integrate, they can have a better end user experience, a la Apple, rather than a continuously, and it's worked out pretty well for Android, a very sort of divergent experience depending on whose hardware does what for whom, with when, and how much they're paying, and then if the carrier actually allows them to update the operating system. So it's really interesting to watch what's going on with Windows 8 because it's obviously a pretty radical move for Microsoft, and it's going to be, I think, really interesting to see what else comes out. And there's a lot of stuff. I caught an article on PC World I really enjoyed where they talked about 10 hidden features in Windows 8. I think my favorite so far was an updated Windows defrag with better manual control over the trim command for SSDs. A lot of interesting stuff going on in that. But on some level, I'm
sure there's a lot more technical stuff going on in addition to this completely new interface. But I agree with what Mary Jo Foley was saying based on her quote there, that it's not how I envision using a computer with a mouse and a keyboard, and I don't think we'll be getting completely rid of a mouse and keyboard anytime soon, especially, for productivity. They showed the touchscreen keyboard.
For entering URLs.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's where they need to be to get into that tablet space. I think it looks very good, the tile-based system, and in a way that they're able to do multitasking and what they're calling the panes system, or if you want to have two applications open at the same time, you can still do that. But it's more important, I think, to a lot of our listeners and viewers is that they showed, even if you're in that interface, you can quickly switch back and run in a standard-looking Windows 7 style interface. So I don't think it's doom and gloom yet. No. But that whole thing about pairing one manufacturer with one software vendor or one OEM with one specific hardware vendor is hopefully going to be revamped. I that they're going to rethink that because it kind of destroys the big advantage that Windows has over Apple in terms of just being friendly to consumers. So
yeah,
there's lots of stuff out there on Windows 8. If you guys want to read up, lots of video. Microsoft put out some videos and that kind of stuff to go through the interface and show a lot of the features. They're pretty cool. It looks nice. I was a fan of the Zoom, I was a fan of the Windows Phone 7 interface. This continues that type of trend for sure.
It's interesting, the idea that sync is going to be built in, web sharing is going to be built in, sub 20-second boot times will be standard. It's their goal is to have these super fast boot times, Kinect integration, the Xbox accessory. It's going to be really interesting to see what they're doing. And then Windows 8's architecture they're claiming it's 128 bits. Robert Morgan, a Microsoft employee, this is up on PCWorld.com, shared a small but interesting detail about Windows 8's architecture. Morgan wrote 128-bit architecture compatibility with the Windows 8 kernel and Windows 9 project plan. So, I'm like, are there any 128-bit processors even on the edge? Yeah, or essentially maybe they're doing such extensive rewriting of the kernel that they want to future-proof it as much as possible.
And that's perfectly acceptable. That's what we want them to do, right? We want them to forward things like that. But no, I haven't seen any even grumblings of 128-bit processors from Intel and AMD. I have no idea what the benefit of those would be at this point. The main benefit of 64-bit was addressable memory space.
Right. It's kind of funny. I finally found another article on PC World. PC World doing a lot of Windows 8 coverage. That employee Robert Morgan, whose profile has now been disappeared off of LinkedIn, who's working as senior research and development. I think the search cache for Google is still up. It says, quote, he's working in high security department for research and development involving strategic planning for medium and long-term projects. 128-bit kernel, 128-bit architecture compatibility, and it's been working with AMD, HP, and IBM. So
Interesting.
Yeah, we should talk about hardware though. I mean, obviously you need an OS to use the hardware, but I mean, what do you want to start with? 990FX, Z68, GTX 580. There's a lot.
There's a lot, isn't there? The 990FX AMD chipset launch, I just figured I'd go ahead and mention here. If you go to PCPro.com, we have a review of an MSI and ASUS motherboard based on that chipset. Not a whole lot. Basically, nothing has changed from a feature standpoint or performance standpoint. From the 890FX to the 990FX, the main change here is added support for the upcoming AMD processors. The unfortunate part for all the motherboard manufacturers is that those processors aren't out yet. So when those are available later this year, you will be able to access them. You'll be able to just drop in, upgrade them into these motherboards. So the idea might be for a consumer today is if you are going to build a system and you think you want to use a Bulldozer processor, you can get Phenom for X4 and X6 processors really cheap. So you can still build a system today, use that Phenom processor because these motherboards are backwards compatible, and take advantage of that system for the 6-month period or whatever it is. And then when Bulldozer is released, you drop that in, boom, you're ready to go with 8 cores of potentially 4.2 gigahertz of frequency, right? Those are the rumors that are still swirling around. So if you're interested in that, go check out those reviews. There's not a whole lot hardware specifications or features or performance to talk about there. It really is all about processor support coming for the rest of 2011.
I got to say the Gigabyte motherboard, the Llano ISSD and Socket 2011 models up on PCPro.com. So you were in the Gigabyte booth, and are they doing a bundle? They're actually doing a bundle with the Intel 311 mSATA card. And now all of a sudden, for the first time in several weeks, I'm starting to think about getting a new motherboard, which of course would require a new Core i7, which I'm not so excited about.
Yeah, this is actually, it was kind of rumored for a little bit, but they're finally showing it off, and it'll be on sale this month. They have a handful of motherboards that are going to offer mSATA ports on the PCB, like directly on the motherboard, micro SATA ports. So these are mainly used for SSDs, and that port is mainly used in notebooks, right, where small form factors really are important, that type of thing. The cool thing about the idea here with an mSATA port on the motherboard is it's for, obviously, Intel's SRT, the SSD caching technology. I can't remember what the acronym stands for now. But SSD caching, where we talked about that a few weeks ago, you add a small SSD to a large 2 terabyte or 1.5 terabyte or any size you want hard drive, and you create a much faster combined hybrid drive. This basically allows you to integrate the SSD directly onto the motherboard, so it's just one less thing you have to worry about. They're even going to sell a model that comes bundled with the Intel Larson Creek 20 gig SLC SSD, which is the one that Intel is pushing for this feature. And apparently the whole board cost is going to be at about $250. So you get a Z68 motherboard that does Crossfire and SLI and all that kind of stuff. It's a medium range board. It's not a super high end board. And then you get the SSD included along with it. And that SSD is usually going to be about $100 on its own. So it turns out to be a pretty good deal financially as well as from a performance standpoint.
Do you feel like if you're already running an SSD or you plan on running a solid state drive for your main PC, does the mSATA, does the 20 gigabyte mSATA SSD drive on the motherboard, do you think it's really going to help out that much in terms of performance?
If you already have an SSD, definitely not. If you're using like a dedicated solid-state drive as your primary OS drive, don't do this. What it's for is if for users that want to take advantage of that Intel SSD caching technology, you would have to have a 3.5-inch hard drive, spindle-based hard drive, and then a 2.5-inch Larson Creek 20 gig SSD, or any other SSD for that matter. This just allows you, you don't have to install that other SSD anymore. It's already integrated on the board. It'll show up as a standard SATA device. You install the software in the same way. And they are selling boards that will have that slot without the SSD. So if you want to use one from Kingston or OCZ or some of the other vendors that are going to come out with this form factor of solid state drive, you can do that. So that's, I think I thought it was a really good idea when I first saw it. And then when the price came out to be what I consider to be pretty competitive for a motherboard plus a solid-state drive. It was pretty interesting. You know, if you scroll down on that same article, you'll see, did you see the pictures of the Socket 2011 motherboard?
Yeah, I was actually eyeballing that. And what was the type on the motherboard that had me looking? Where is it? Dual BIOS Dynamic Energy Saver PCI Express 3.0, and I was like,
yeah. Yeah. So most of the motherboard manufacturers were showing off a mock-up or a pre-design of the new Socket 2011, which will be for the Sandy Bridge E processors. That'll probably be out towards the end of this year. Next generation part from Intel. You'll notice that the DIMM slots are on either side of the socket. You've got 2 on the left and 2 on the right. It's actually a quad channel memory controller here, so a big upgrade there. Also, it's hard to tell necessarily in the screenshot or in the images rather, but this processor socket on this platform is enormous. And there's actually 2 little metal arms that you have to open or close to access the processor in here. So it's much larger socket. Obviously, we went from 1,366 pins on the Nehalem part to 2,011 pins on this upcoming CPU. So if you look through the different Computex news articles on PCPro.com, you'll see several different mock-ups, but you know, at this point, they're still all kind of in the development phase. But if you're interested in seeing what the next generation hardware will look like, you can do so there.
Get your excited on.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take a quick break here and thank one of today's podcast sponsors, Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to create a high-quality website or blog. If you've never heard of Squarespace.com, it has an easy-to-use user interface for creating and managing a website or blog. It's optimized for both beginners and CSS experts, so if you want to get down into the code, you can definitely do that. They have hundreds of design templates to choose from, and you can customize any of those designs to fit your needs, so you can have some place to start and customize from there. Saves you a lot of work and time, would be my guess. They have really, really good iPhone and iPad apps if you want to update your blog on the go. You don't have to worry about finding a full PC or loading up something if you're on a slow data connection. They have online resources and a special support team to give you help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that's always good. This is an all-inclusive service. It's hosting, it's the blog software itself, it's all of that included in there. And the blog software is very robust. It includes blog modules, form builders if you want to collect email addresses or information from your visitors, Flickr photo displays, Twitter widgets, Google Maps, all kinds of stuff like that. It has website tracking, so you know how many times your site is viewed, built-in search engine optimizer. It has permission access handling if you have multiple people that you want to run this website. Say maybe you're going to cover the Computex show every year. You happen to live in Taiwan. You'd be able to do that fairly easily. It's built on a cloud architecture for speed and reliability, so you don't have to worry about your site going down if you happen to get a lot of traffic. You can use Squarespace for all of your website needs. Build it, host it, update it anytime. For a free 14-day trial, go to squarespace.com/twich, TWICH. Sign up for a free account, no credit card needed. You just try it out and start building your website, and you can see how easy it is to use these tools to build a website of any type, blog or otherwise, that you might need. After you try it, be sure to check out their annual plans with savings of up to 20% off the normal price. And again, if you want to try that 14-day trial, squarespace.com/twich. We thank them for their support this week in computer hardware.
GTX 580 graphics options add to Asus ROG. Is it ROG or ROG? I gotta ask.
Well, I don't like the word ROG, so I'm going to say ROG. But I actually have no idea what their official answer is. Republic of Gamers is what it stands for.
Ridiculous heatsink / fan combo. That looks like it takes up. It's only a 3-slot card, but you look at the picture and immediately it looks like it takes up 4 slots.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
so
is it the fastest card ever, or is it just the biggest delete expletive heatsink on a card ever?
It's probably the one. And well, there's 2 cards that they announced here. The GTX 580 Matrix, which is the one you see this 3-slot photo of. It's a single GPU card, 19-phase power control, lots of BIOS and tweaking and overclocking options on that. Mass production card. You'll be able to buy this if you decide you need a 3-slot graphics card. The more interesting one is probably the Asus Mars 2 graphics card. And the Mars 2 goes a step further because it includes a pair of GTX 580 GPUs on a single PCB, which will obviously create the fastest graphics card that has ever existed up until today. So it's based on the same type of hardware, the same PCB, 19-phase power design. It's got tweaking software, new GPU tweak overclocking software. But a pair of GTX 580s on a single PCB has not been done before. The GTX 590 that NVIDIA released earlier this year is a pair of GTX 570s, essentially, or 580s that are much, much, much lower clocked. ASUS's numbers are currently showing that this is about 25% faster than the X590, so expect it to be very expensive. I think they did say it was a limited edition. I don't even remember, we talked about the Asus Aries graphics card. It came in like this enormous briefcase type of item. This is how it was shipped. I think you'll see the same thing from this. It's going to be one of those maybe $1,200 graphics cards and that kind of thing that not many people are going to want to get their hands on, but is impressive to see the engineering behind, if nothing else. It's pretty cool stuff.
I'm mocking it now, less than I know it's you can get it as two 580s on a single board, but oh my goodness, $1,000 is a stupid amount of money for a GPU, even a really cool one. Revo Drive 3 hybrid, basically were the big highlights of the OCZ showcase at Computex. What's going on? Well, with both. Should we start with hybrid? I mean, because it's
hybrid's a cool one, I think. We talked about the SRT stuff, right? The Intel SSD caching. Obviously, that's only useful if you're on an Intel platform, and specifically if you're using a Z68 chipset. Right. The idea behind the Revo Drive Hybrid is it combines a PCI Express-based solid-state drive, which those are already really, really, really fast, faster than your SATA-based SSDs, and combines it with a standard 2.5-inch laptop spindle-based hard drive on a single kind of adapter that plugs into your computer, and using some software, some firmware technology that they're licensing from another company, offers SSD HDD hybrid technology to anybody, right? So you can install this on any Intel platform or any AMD platform for that matter, and it will work. It's bootable. They're claiming that it's even more efficient and faster than the Intel technology, and because it's based on a PCI Express SSD, you have a lot of preordained speed benefits in that regard, and it's based on a new SandForce controller. It's rated at 575 megs read, 500 megs write. They're going to be available for what I would consider fairly modest costs. The pricing will start at $400 for the 60 gig SSD, 500 gig hard drive iteration of it, and it'll go up from there. So I don't know. This kind of intrigues me maybe a little bit more than the standard PCI Express-based SSDs, because you get some of that capacity benefit as well. I don't know. We've talked about Z68 and the SSD caching. I don't know what your opinions are on that. If you think a lot of people will still want to go with the single SSD for your OS and separate drives and that type of thing, but for simplicity's sake, these type of solutions are pretty interesting.
Every time I look at one of these, I ask the same question, like, wait, this is non-volatile memory, right? Because I keep flashing back to some drives from kind of like year 2000 that were for essentially volatile RAM on a PCI card.
Yeah, that's not this.
Yeah, I think the Revo Drive Hybrid is one of those products that it's going to have to ship on time. It's going to have to come in at or under price from what OCZ expects to charge, because 500 gigabytes with this performance and the 60 gigabyte SSD sounds great, unless a 256 gigabyte SSD. I don't know. I think I want to see it benchmarked. I want to hear how it holds up long term. I think the theory is great. I'd rather it had 3.5-inch drives instead of 2.5-inch drives. Yeah. So you could,
one of the ideas that Alan had was that they should make a card that just has a SATA port on the Revo Drive, right? And then you have the option: do I want to use it as just a PCI Express SSD, or do I want to make it a hybrid solution? I think that's a pretty good idea too. The other Revo Drive 3, we'll mention this quickly if you want raw speed and performance. So the Revo Drive 3 X2, there's a standard and an X2 model. The X2 is impressive. It includes 4 SandForce controllers on a PCI Express-based SSD. It's rated at about 1,500 megabytes per second read speeds and 1,200 megabytes per second writes. So if you need that kind of speed, I'd like to know what you're doing with it. But it's there, and it's not it's more expensive, but it's not stupid expensive. The 240 gig models will start at $599. So it's a little bit. It's definitely more than a SATA-based SSD, but not incredibly much. So.
It's expensive enough at this point.
Yeah.
I'm going to say the Asus Janshui Bay motherboard combines LGA 1366 and socket 2011. Every time I see this happens like every other major socket transition, because it takes it takes that long to remember how horrendous the last round of dual socket motherboards were. And I'm not trying to take any away of Asus's thunder away, because they do a lot of good stuff in hardware. But I think the quote, did you write this quote? So this board probably won't fit in your case and maybe won't even see the light of day outside a few reviews and interesting designs, but the concept is cool to see. Use your LGA 1366 processor today and be able to upgrade to the socket 2011 platform when those CPUs are released. Of course, you'll have to buy this probably incredibly expensive motherboard to do so.
No joke.
But it's a nice theory. Do me a favor, let somebody else buy this motherboard and see if it works before anybody out there in the Twitch audience does. Interesting concept, though.
Yeah, and I don't even know what case you would put something like this in, or I mean, it's an enormous mammoth piece of hardware, and it's branded as Republic of Gamers, which is their gaming brand. So it's not even like here's our new server platform type of thing, and you've got to have different DIMM slots for each one. To me, it's this Frankenstein beast of a product that I don't think is going to help really with the transition of anything. I think if you're willing to spend whatever that motherboard would cost, you're probably just better buying a new motherboard.
Yeah.
When the socket 2011 comes out, but
buying a motherboard that it will have extensive support and BIOS upgrades for the new processor, maybe.
Right. Exactly.
So what's going on? AMD was showing off the Trinity APU based on the Bulldozer and a APU for tablets.
They didn't really show off the APU for tablets, but they did. Rick Bergman of AMD is one of the senior VPs there, pulled out a processor that was a Trinity design. So it's the next iteration of the APU platform from AMD after Llano. So Llano is not out yet, comes out later this month. They detailed kind of the pricing segments and all that, the marketing and branding and that kind of stuff while they're here at Computex. And they showed here's the next step, right? They showed a little bit of the roadmap. Trinity is what is the combination of a ATI-based GPU, similar to what we'll see in Llano, but with a Bulldozer core rather than the existing Phenom cores. So this is a product that'll be available in 2012. And then they also kind of announced the code names, I guess, more or less, for the ultra-thin netbook laptops called Krishna. And for the first time, talked about Hondo, which is a name for the tablets. Or the name for the APUs that they're building for tablets. And the problem with that is they don't really have a lot of, I don't know, they don't have any experience in this tablet market yet, right? They're the last competitor in. So
I'm sorry, you kind of lost me at Krishna and Hondo. It's like Hindu central figure in the Hindu religion and a John Wayne movie character for your names. I'm just gonna obviously at this point it's time to thank our friends at Netflix for helping to sponsor the podcast here at Twitch.
Indeed. Netflix. Go ahead.
I should also point out for anybody who saw me with my pinky in my cheek, I have one of the wires in my braces is very sharp and is digging a furrow into the inside of my cheek. So I'm trying to get the wax back over it before I start whimpering at this end of the podcast.
Nice. So yeah, Netflix, thank you for sponsoring this show. They deliver movies directly home, saves you time, money, and hassle. You can instantly watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed directly to your PC or Mac, or stream to your TV via a Netflix-ready device, including the Xbox 360, PS3, or Nintendo Wii. Plus, you can get DVDs or Blu-rays by mail in about one business day. You can watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want. There are never any late fees or due dates. One of the things, now I'm out of the country, so I can't actually access Netflix here, but I know when I'm traveling in the States, it is infinitely useful for those couple of hours of downtimes, maybe before or after meetings when you're trying to find something to do. One of the things that is very helpful with the streaming Netflix. Is if you're interested in television shows, you can catch up on those or watch a lot of back episodes. For example, Family Guy is available on Netflix streaming. You can get seasons 1 through 7 on Family Guy starting today. It completely instantly to your PC or to any of those devices that we were talking about before. And if you've never seen Seth MacFarlane's comedy, first of all, I don't know where you've been. It's maybe not child-friendly cartoons, but it's more on the line of Simpsons or Futurama, those types of comedy cartoons. But you can access all 7, well, and it's not all 7 seasons. I guess that's through 2009 or 2010 of Family Guy on the go, on your iPad, on your PC. Actually, now they have an Android app that works on some of the phones, including the HTC Evo that I have, that I'm very thankful for. So that's all very good news. So if you haven't tried Netflix, you definitely need to give it a shot. It's instant movie watching, as well as the DVDs and Blu-rays in the mail, as we're talking about before. You can sign up for a free trial membership at Netflix, netflix.com/twit, and you can instantly watch, like we were talking about, Family Guy or any other thousands of TV episodes and movies. So be sure when you sign up for your free trial, you go to netflix.com/twit, and we thank Netflix for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware as well. Let's move on. I guess we've got lots, well, not a whole lot more here, but one interesting thing we saw, you actually mentioned it when we looked at the Gigabyte motherboard, was MSI showed a PCI Express Gen 3 motherboard. What was interesting about this, though, is they showed a PCI Express Gen 3 slots running on a Z68 motherboard. So that's, current generation Sandy Bridge processor, that type of thing. And they're able to do this simply by tweaking the specifications and the controls that they have on the current processors, right? So this would allow you to get PCI 3, basically the first motherboard with PCI Gen 3 in the world that I know of that will be for sale, and this board will be available by the end of the month. Now, I don't know how useful that's going to be for you yet, because we don't have any graphics cards that are taking advantage of PCI Express 3.0 yet. And the only place where they claim they're seeing performance benefits are with PCI Express based solid-state drives, maybe like the Revo Drive X2, something like that, or the Revo Drive 3 X2, where you're pushing 1,500 megs or 1,200 megs per second, that you will see a benefit here moving from PCI Express Gen 2 to PCI Express Gen 3. So that was kind of interesting, if nothing else from a technical point of view there too. So did you check out these? On this list here, there was, like, in the same post, there's some graphics. There's a new graphics card that had a couple of interesting features. I don't know if you looked at that at all, Patrick. Did we mute Patrick again?
I really have to switch this microphone because I keep leaning forward onto the cable.
Nice.
No, actually, I was more looking at how shockingly clean the Corsair's carbide cases were, and I'm still kind of curious about the H80 and the H100. Like, I'm trying to decide why they released those so close on the heels of the last round of the water coolers.
I think, well, so the Corsair Carbide series is actually interesting. So they're slowly moving their way down into the lower cost cases, right? The 800D and 700D are great, but they're $300 or so cost, right? Nobody really wants, not many people are going to spend that kind of money on a case. You have to be that hardcore enthusiast for that. The Carbide cases offer a lot of the same features in not necessarily small packages, but just lower cost, right? A little bit more plastic, a little bit less metal, a little bit thinner metal, maybe, that type of thing. But they still have, the large CPU cutouts in the back. They have the behind the motherboard tray, cable routing systems, the rubber grommets to feed cables through, and that type of thing.
I think for $100 for that, what you're looking at right now is the inside of the Carbide 400R, and it's a really, really, really well configured case for $100. If you think about all the crap that's out there, and the $50 to $100 range on cases, at least when I go to Central Computer here in San Francisco, it's great because it's a computer store. They literally have 50 different cases on display, but you realize how often the inside of a case was determined by anything other than the ease of use and installation of hardware. But these are really, really well thought out cases for a pretty reasonable amount of money.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm definitely up for that.
you were asked about the Corsair H80 and H100 as well. They did kind of release those very quickly. I think if you kind of look at the politics in this one, that one kind of explains why they were so quick to release them. I think they have moved from Acetec as the supplier to Coolit as the supplier. So the H80 and H100 are based on that new kind of Coolit design. With tweaks and that kind of stuff by Corsair. So the H100 is, we would call it, it uses dual 120 millimeter radiator and will require a case that supports that, right? So I don't know, you know, all of the Corsair cases, of course, will support it. They've thought that much ahead, right? So you've got a dual 120 radiator, the 700D, the 800D, even these new lower cost cases have at least a dual 120 location on the top specifically for these. If you do not have that capability in yours, you can get the H80, which is gives you similar amounts of radiator surface area, but it's thicker rather than longer, right? So it's double wide. So I guess kind of like the what was it, the H70 that just came out as well. To this was like, they're getting enormous now. They're taking up tons of space inside these.
I didn't know. The best fan I ever had for water cooling was I found a Dodge. It was like a 6-cylinder minivan radiator with an electric fan attached to it. Running at 12 volts, it would basically blow the computer across the room. At 5 volts, it was slow enough that it didn't make a lot of noise. But having 2-3 gallons of coolant makes a huge difference on keeping your processor cool. So I'm not surprised they're actually going with bigger radiators. Did you see, you were talking about the MSI with the new GTX cards. Did you actually see the dust removal tech in operation?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I'm interested in that. Like, that was when I was talking to them, I was like, okay, I could buy into that if it works. I was trying to think of ways to test it, like, without having to wait a year for dust to build up in a computer or something like that, you know?
Borrow a cat.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. So the idea is on these dust removal technology on these graphics card coolers that MSI is going to make is that the fan spins in the opposite direction for the first 30 seconds when you power it on, and then it reverses and it cools, blows air onto the heatsink as it normally would. Now, I don't know how much. I'm curious to see how much good that actually does. It only does it when you power your system on or off, so it's not going to do anything if you leave it on all the time.
Yeah, the first 30 seconds it reverse spins. I mean, it's a nice hack. If it does it every time you power up your computer, then that's certainly much more effective than only happening, once a year. I don't think it's going to be effective as a self-cleaning mode on an oven. But I think it has the potential to reduce the amount of buildup on the fan, which is not a bad thing. And if it's free, if you're not paying any extra for it, it's got potential. So does the Smart Temp, the sensor tech, where they're basically looking at. I thought this was well, maybe it's not smart, but I was more amused by it, where it's a coating on the fan that changes from blue to white as the ambient temperature increases. So if the inside of your chassis hits the 45 Celsius mark, then the fans will be completely white and should give you an indication of system stability.
Yeah, there were several companies doing things like that. ECS had motherboards, new motherboards coming out that have a similar coating on the heatsink of the chipset that will give you an indication of ambient temperature as well. So it seems to me that some type of thermally reactive material is making its way around Taiwan. People are trying to sell it to these guys, right? And they're figuring out where they can put it and how they can do interesting things with it. I think that motherboard one makes a little bit more sense than the fans on the GPU, because I don't know how easy it is to see the fans on your GPU, even if you have a window on your case, right? They're kind of at the wrong angle for that. But interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I like the concept. I like thermally responsive coatings on products. Probably because I miss mood rings. Twitch, TWICH at twit.tv. That's the email address, or you can tweet us at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton on the Twitter. Darth Galt emails in, which is kind of a really frightening combination of of a classic book and a classic movie, and we'll just move on right past that. It says I assume it's he, it could be Dagny in disguise. The G620 is launched for $77 at Newegg this week. 2 cores, 2 threads. I know you guys don't like to talk about anything having less than 90 threads, but do you have any idea the performance of this card for everyday computing compared to like the onboard graphics on an i3 or AMD X2? The G620 is the only Sandy Bridge CPU that falls into the not insanely overpriced category. First of all, I'm like, I don't remember the I don't know. Perhaps I've gone from my $500 gaming PC Origins to a in one machine build to being some sort of cake eater. But when you look at this,
we only talk about the 90 core stuff, but this is all new to me.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the Sandy Bridge, right? And you're starting down at the top of the line, like an Intel Core. Actually, let me arrange this in highest price to lowest price instead of featured items. So, $314 for a i7-2600K. At the bottom end is, the G620 Sandy Bridge 2.6 gigahertz. Next up is $85 for the G620T 2.2 gigahertz, which is the 35 watt part.
Yeah, that's low power.
The G840 is. Go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, I don't find for a CPU for a machine that you want to hold on to for 3 to 5 years. I don't think $100 for a CPU is particularly offensive. And the reality is if you are not a gamer and you are looking to save that much money, then I would probably I would probably skip any kind of GPU and just use the onboard graphics until at such point either an operating system upgrade or a desire to game caused you to upgrade to an actual performance GPU, even a mid-range performance GPU.
These new dual-core Sandy Bridge processors are new to me. Intel didn't really they didn't promote these. They didn't send review samples out and that kind of stuff. So when I got this email, it was kind of I didn't know they were making a dual core Sandy Bridge part. So I'm going to buy one of these and just see, because this is, what I'm curious to see is this $77 processor from Intel. How does it stack up against what AMD is out there, what AMD has out there, right? Because we always talk about one of the main benefits that AMD has is that they offer good performance at a budget, right? So will they be able to continue that with these types of releases? I don't know. So I'm going to pick up one of these and see what we can get out of it. I think that will be interesting. But I think you're right. If you can get a quad core part for $120, chances are I think that's going to be our recommendation, right?
Yeah.
For the long term of just about anything. So.
Yeah, I mean, for another $50, you get a Core i3 2100 running at 3 gigahertz. And you're looking at pretty much the same level of it's kind of funny that $78 part, when you start looking at some of the core value, the core specs, 3 megabytes of L3 cache, 256 kilobytes, L2 caches. Those are both dual core parts. It's interesting. It probably compares pretty favorably to the Core i3. I would love to see, they both have Intel HD Graphics 2000. I would actually be really curious to see that $125 Core i3 2100 benchmarked against the G620. Yep. Because I like to be cheap.
We'll see what we can come up with. Let's see. Oh. No, I didn't close my show notes. I thought I did. Let's see. We got an email from Chris about the difference of shutting down, hibernating, and standby, and that kind of stuff. He says, I was wondering what puts the least wear and tear on a PC when it's not in use, hibernating, sleeping, or shutting down. I have a decent solid-state drive. He says he has a 128 gig Crucial C300 that I'm running as my OS app drive with a 1 terabyte spindle drive for data and other stuff. Booting into and shutting down for Windows 7 is pretty fast already, so if I'm going to be away from it for more than an hour or so, I shut it down. The machine is probably up on average 12 or so hours a day, with maybe 1 or 2 reboot cycles in there. But I'm wondering if all those extra shutdown starts are bad on the PC components. Should I be hibernating or sleeping instead? What about power savings of shutting down versus hibernating and sleeping? So I'm the exact opposite of this. All of my computers are on 24 hours a day, except my laptop. At least the desktop machines are all like that. So,
partially right.
Down, yeah.
We should point out that 5 years ago, the difference between hibernating and sleeping were radically different, partially because, ACPU wasn't particularly well. Basically, the power control APCI on notebook motherboards especially wasn't particularly well implemented. Mm-hmm. You would have spectacular battery drain even when you thought your computer was off because you closed the lid. So a lot of cases, you would basically enable hibernating mode, which would take longer to shut down. It would take longer to come back up, but you would actually still have battery life. If you know what I mean, you laugh, but it used to be like you close your notebook, you put it in your bag, you flew somewhere, you woke up the next morning for a business meeting, and if you hadn't plugged your computer in before you fell asleep in the hotel room, your battery life would be gone because you had drained so much of your battery life in sleep mode. So hibernating was this hardcore version of sleeping where basically it wrote all of its notes onto the hard drive. It shut everything down. When you open the lid and hit the power stud, it would basically reconstitute itself from the hard drive, bring everything back up to speed. It took a hell of a lot less time than booting up, because it used to be you could easily spend 2 minutes waiting for your notebook to boot up and you still had battery life. With an SSD, I would probably say you could put it in hibernating mode and max out your battery life savings. And the truth is you're right. If you're going to be away from it for more than an hour, sure, shut it down, start it back up. Your boot time is ridiculously slow at this point compared to what it was with a hard drive.
Fast, I mean.
Yeah, personally, I would experiment with hibernating mode, sleeping mode, and powering it down. And the reality is your CPUs are so fast, and the BIOS designs have changed so much, and your SSD is so much faster than anything that was around back in the day when they invented hibernating and sleeping. You probably can just shut it down, because I guarantee you the best battery life should coming out of shutting it down. But you're going to have to experiment with your computer, make sure the BIOS is upgraded to make sure you're getting the best kind of sleep mode in the motherboard. Although that's another thing; it doesn't matter as much as it used to. I would say you're probably just fine with sleep mode. I would compare it to hibernate and shutting down, just to see maybe with hibernate you can turn it from a 6-second boot time to a 3-second boot time and really impress the neighbors.
In terms of like wear and tear, I would say I'm not super worried about it. If you are worried about the wear and tear on your SSD, then hibernating is going to be a negative in that regard, because hibernation, you're writing, if you've got 8 gigs of memory and you've got 4 gigs of stuff in memory, it will write 4 gigs of stuff to the hard drive, to your SSD, and then it will read that back. So every time you hibernate, it's writing the contents of your system memory to the drive. Whereas standby, that is not the case. Right, so standby, it maintains low voltage to the memory and it keeps the contents of the memory there. So that might be a little bit better for wear and tear on your SSD, although I don't think it's a giant concern still. So yeah, there you go. Desktop or PC, or desktop or notebook for that matter.
Scythe Noir. Oops, sorry.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Oh, this was an unusual one. You snuck this in on me. I didn't see it. Scythe Noir says, at Ryan Shrout, at Patrick Norton. Yes, back on Screensavers, they showed a PC cooling system that used no pumps, a vane-like system. Where is it? Man, we did a lot of weird stuff with cooling PCs on the Screensavers. Probably the most out of control one being the Florinert based system, where we used a combination of Florinert and we used Florinert and dry ice, and we discovered that you can freeze rubbing alcohol even at 90% concentrations, and eventually chill fans down to the point where they don't actually function. But we did an entire submerged system in freezed Florinert, which actually creates issues and the mineral oil PC guys have discovered this. Sometimes you need some kind of movement inside the mineral oil to actually keep the heat from concentrating in one section of your giant pile of liquid. Yoshi and I did one where we used liquid nitrogen to cool a system. We basically custom made a copper tube on top of a heatsink that mounted on top of a CPU. We did refrigeration and freezer-based frozen CPU coolers that were built into cases to build system in. We did water cooling and several different evolutions. But the no pump vane-like system, I have no idea which one that is. I mean, we did like, you know, piezoelectric and fans and you know, ones with no, some of the original Zalman ones were these crazy ornate copper flowers with no moving parts. But I have no idea. And a couple ones
sounds pretty fantastical.
Yeah,
this,
well, there were
vane-like system.
There was some stuff we saw where it was like, you know, somebody at MIT had done something really fascinating, but the vane-like system, man, that's going to be bothering me all day long.
If anybody knows, send us an email, please, so Patrick can go back to his normal life.
Well, I was kind of laughing. What it almost sounds like is the tubes they use inside of notebooks, where they do they basically the vapor tubes where they you know, basically have liquid inside of the
heat pipes and stuff like that.
Heat pipes, yeah. English would be a good use of my English degree. It almost sounds like it was a heat pipe system that we showed off inside of a notebook, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody do a heat pipe system for a full-size PC, mostly because it's not a particularly efficient way of doing things in a large case.
It would have to be very large for that to work. So
very, very large. Bernie's got a question about smart response tech. Hi, Ryan and Patrick. I've just installed an old OCZ 64 gigabyte SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive in my new computer with an Asus Z68 motherboard. Color me jealous. All is working well. However, all of my hard drive speed tests really only show the speed of the spinning drive. The Windows Experience Index equals 5.9. SciSoft Sandra says 114 megabytes per second, 13.5 millisecond access time. My questions are, is the main advantage of this the Intel SRT technology just to load programs, not other read-write technology? 2, wouldn't using my SSD for the operating system, the C drive, and the spinning drive for everything else, the D drive, be just as good? Great show. Thanks, Bernie.
Interesting. So the second question first, would using my SSD for the OS and spinning drive separately be just as good? It would probably actually be a little bit better in terms of performance, but it would not be as convenient. Right. The idea of the hybrid solution is that it's convenient. You have one drive letter. You don't have to worry about separating the data and that kind of stuff. As for the benchmarks and stuff that he's showing, so keep in mind of how the SSD caching works. The data really only resides on the spindle-based hard drive, his 1 terabyte hard drive in this case. And so the first time you read it in, the first time you run your SciSoft Sandra benchmark, right? It's getting all of that data off of the spindle-based drive, and then it reads it. And then the idea of the caching is that it keeps it on. It reads it from the hard drive to the SSD and then to the system, and the SSD stores it as long as it can until it gets full. The cache gets full. It needs to remove some other things. So that's why if you start up your game the first time, you start up a game, it will load at the same speed. However, if you close it and load up the same game again, then you will see the speed increases. If you boot your operating system for the first time, it's going to take the long time to boot. If you boot it up a second time, it gets progressively better. The more it's able to cache, the more it's able to learn. So I think that is kind of why, you know, your Windows Experience Index and your Sandra results are like that. And also, Sandra is kind of like, it's doing random things. It's trying to hit the drive in different ways. And I don't think SRT will be able to cache that necessarily. So yes, the main advantage until SRT is to load programs faster and actually load real-world data that you are going to use on a normal basis. If you use Outlook and you have PST files, those will be cached on that drive, and you will see an incredibly noticeable difference accessing them and moving emails around and that kind of stuff with that. That's what the SRT technology is built for. So it doesn't surprise me at all that benchmarks aren't going to see that. And that is one of the challenges of reviewing hardware in this day and age, is the experience type impact that these technologies have, as opposed to larger and taller bar graphs too. So
everything's changing. It's kind of interesting because it always amazes me because it always sounds so ridiculous. You know, the operating system will adapt to your average usage and enable, you know, it's like, yeah, it's going to adapt to my holy crap. Things are booting faster. Things are moving faster. Yeah. I am storing huge amounts of application that in the, you know, the main system memory that I'm not using. And it's a smart hack. It's a smart use of resources. But it's not as thrilling if you want to kind of get your everything you're doing validated by the benchmarking process, unless you want to develop really complicated benchmarks. So how many more days at Computex? What are you going to see next? Obviously, I'm going to assume that Computex is going to define the PCPer.com experience for the next couple days, to say the very least.
Yeah, so we don't have very many meetings left, maybe just a couple left today, but we have a lot of stuff that we have seen that we haven't been able to write up and put on the site yet. So yeah, PCPer.com is going to be dominated by Computex for at least the rest of this week and probably through the weekend. And then after that, we have a lot of work to do on Llano reviews and catching up on some of the other stuff that happened while I was in Abu Dhabi. So still a lot of news and stuff being added to the site this week. So check out if you go to PCPer.com/Computex, you can see all of the news that's specific from the show in that regards if you want to. So.
All the news that's fit from Computex.
You guys doing any kind of new tech Computex coverage on Techzilla?
Actually, I was kind of hoping to get you to talk about it next week after you're back in the States, but we were laughing. We're kind of like the opposite end of things this week. We were talking about upgrading a trailing edge GPU because we had somebody who's like wants to upgrade their absolutely fantastic, if it was still in 2006 GPU, to something a little more modern. We're encrypting files with TrueCrypt. And talking about tuner cards for satellite TV. And then next week, Robert Heron actually talks about calibrating your computer monitor and why some tools work better for that than others. And I am obsessed, by the way, with Google's +1, which they decided to roll out for websites. I'm convinced that is my secret weapon against irritating websites. That Google +1 is going to make everything better, which is possibly the most indulgent fantasy I've ever had that involved Google. With all due respect to, Marissa Meyer and Matt Cutts and all the other amazing people working over there, including our own former partner in crime. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the whole search engines battling the content farms. I have a serious heat on for content farms right now.
Agreed.
Well, I think we're going to call that an episode of Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware. Ryan Shrout will hopefully get to spend more than a week in the United States, the continent, if not in the actual city and state that he calls home.
That's actually very accurate. Yes, I will be home for a week, but then I leave to go to Seattle for something else. But I'm staying in the country, so that's going in the right direction. There's
somebody's like, what's the problem with working in China? And I was talking to a friend of mine who was looking at a job. I'm like, you're gonna have to be there every 2 weeks. He's like, yeah. Like, you okay with not seeing your family for 6 days at a pop and spending 5 days a month on an airplane? And he's like, it wouldn't be. And he starts doing the math and he kind of looks at me kind of blankly like, oh.
Yeah. 14-hour flights are not my favorite.
No, but at least we have, really cool toys to take with us on the plane now.
Exactly.
That's it for This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week.